Hi, this is just a really quick video trying to show you how my command manager works. This is a command manager I recently wrote for a project I'm working on with a friend because I was fed up of having random kind of patchwork ones that were constantly being added to, so I took the time to write a nice clean one that had all the features we need. This has subfolder support for your commands, so you can organise each command into different files. So we'll have all of our games inside a games folder, have all of our staff commands inside a staff folder, and so on and so on. It also has per server configs using nmap, I'll explain that a bit later, and it also has permissions using this property here. You can set which permissions your command needs to be able to run in each command. I'm just going to quickly talk about these dependencies. We only require client and collection from Discord.js because that's all we're actually going to need in this file. There's no point importing loads of stuff we don't need. Read.sync is just for reading through the folders. It's from FS, which is Node's native file system module. Nmap is for the per server configs. It stores information into a database, and it's really good for each server individually having its own customizable settings. I put a link to the documentation in the description for that, and also an example for per server configs using it. So we create a new client so our bot can actually run on Discord using the client we imported earlier, and then using that client we will then create a commands collection. This is just a storage thing. We can store all of our different commands in there so we can run them later. We do the same thing for cooldowns. Here's a bit more stuff for our per server configs. We create a new settings nmap, and then we have a default settings variable, which is what all of those will start off as before they're changed. Here, we read through our commands folder, and then we store each individual folder and file. We store each individual file in every folder inside our command files variable. We then loop through each file inside there and add it to its own variable, and then set that variable into the commands collection. We do the name and then the actual command. Here's our event listeners. Event listeners just wait until a certain thing happens, in this case when the bot gets ready, and then it will run the code inside this arrow function. So when the bot is fully loaded, it will log ready into the console and set its activity to playing.help. You can change that to whatever you want really, as long as the types is actually valid. Guild delete is a bit more stuff for our maps. When the bot leaves the server, it will trigger this code, and we don't want loads of things being stored about settings for servers you're not actually in, so it will just delete it when it leaves the server. This is our on-message event listener. This is where we actually handle the commands and figure out what you said. So we start off by checking, is the command written by a bot? If it is, stop, because we don't want bots talking to themselves. The reason we do return, instead of having all of the code underneath inside that if statement, and checking if the command wasn't written by a bot, is because it's much cleaner to do it this way. If we didn't do it this way, you'd end up with massive nested if statements, which isn't really that good. This just looks a whole lot nicer and it's a lot easier to write. So, we want a lot of command managers. Well, this is checking if the command was run in DM. If the type of the channel is DM, then we do whatever we want with it. And a lot of command managers just see their stop right there, they'll return and say this command can only be run in a server. But we want certain commands to actually be able to be run in DMs, especially for some of our games, like rock, paper, scissors might need to be done in DMs. So we don't just want to stop. We will check if it's run in DMs, get the prefix out of the default settings variable, because if it is run in DMs, then there won't be a server to get the prefix out of. So we just get it off our default prefix. So if it's in a server, it will check if that server actually has settings. If it does, carry on. If it doesn't, create one, starting off as default settings, and it will set prefix to whatever it is inside that server's settings. Here we will use that to check if the message starts with the prefix. If it doesn't, stop. Here, we will calculate what you actually said for the first time. Arguments is everything you said after your first word. That's extra details that you need to type to make the command run. So we just split everything after the first word we add to there, and then everything in the first word we add to your command name. That's what you actually ran, that's the command you tried to run, but we'll remove the prefix, so we'll remove the first character. The reason we do prefix.length instead of just first character is because your prefix might be multiple things long. It might be 2 characters or something. Here we will get the command out of our command collection using the command name variable, and then we will also here check for aliases. This is how we can, aliases are alternate ways to run the command. So instead of saying announce, I could do say or send in this case. If it couldn't find a command, stop, because we don't want it trying to run random commands that don't exist. Here's when we'll actually do DM handling. Another property inside of your command is guild only. That is whether or not it can only be run in a server. In Discord.js, servers are referred to as guilds. So if it is guild only and it was done in DMs, say I can't run that command inside DMs. But if it's not guild only, it will carry on, and if it was done in a server, it will carry on. This is permissions. I'll just briefly go back to here. Inside this user permissions array, you can set which permissions your command actually needs, or leave it blank, then it will just assume it doesn't need any. So we have manage messages and manage roles here. So what this bit does here is it will loop through every permission in that array, and then using has permission, it will check if the user has it. If they don't have it, they will run, it will just say you don't have permission to run that command and stop. Another thing we can set is our args, which I explained earlier, whether or not your command needs arguments. If it does need arguments and you didn't provide any, it will just say you didn't provide any arguments. Here's how you should properly use that command. Here are cooldowns. This is probably the most complicated bit in the whole thing. It will check if you are inside your cooldown. It will check if you're already on cooldown. So if the cooldown collection has you in it. If it doesn't, it will add you to it when you ran that command. It will now calculate the date now, and then set timestamps to everybody on cooldown for that specific command. It will then get your cooldown amount, which can be set inside a command as one of these properties. We haven't done it here. Or, if it doesn't exist, it will default to 3, and then times it by 1,000, because that's all in milliseconds. Here, it will check if you're in the timestamp variable. If you are, it will calculate what time your command runs out, based off the time it actually went on from your collection, plus how long you're on cooldown for. It will then see if that time is now. So if the current date is less than that, it knows you're still on cooldown. It will calculate the time left using the difference between your expiration time and now, divided by 100, to get seconds instead of milliseconds, and then it will say, please wait this time before using that command. This is when we actually try and run the command. When we've made sure everything is ready to run, and they should be able to run it, we'll use a try-catch block. A try-catch block is pretty simple. It just tries to run the code in here. If it can't, if it errors and something goes wrong, it will run the code in here. You should try to have as little code as possible in try-catch blocks, because it will also count syntax errors and stuff. So if you have a big chunk in a try-catch block, and you made one tiny mistake in there, it will just stop the entire thing from being run. So it will try and execute the command, but if it can't, it will say there was an error while trying to execute this command. This is where we log in down at the bottom. That's your secret token that you can get when you make your bot. You should never send that to anyone, because that will allow them to log on to your bot and run possibly malicious code. If you have a bot in 100 servers, they can then run their own code on those 100 servers using your bot. So if ever you think it could have been leaked, just go into your Discord dev portal and regenerate it. That's all for today. I'm going to make a more in-depth tutorial about this soon, and I'm also going to make a tutorial about how I use classes to make chat games in Discord.js. Thanks for watching, bye.